Imagine a forgotten army rising from the Sahara, not riding chariots, but camels, not armed with kingdoms, but faith. Within half a lifetime, they subdued the richest kingdom in West Africa, crossed into Spain, and stopped Christian armies dead in their tracks at the Battle of Saghrajaz. This wasn't Rome, it wasn't Byzantium, it was Berber camel cavalry, led by scholars-turned-kings. They called themselves Almoravidun, those bound by religious conviction. What they built became one of the largest Islamic empires in the 11th century, spanning from Mauritania to Andalusia. This is the story of the Sahara's roar, the only time the desert became an army that reshaped continents. In the vast emptiness of the Sahara, where the wind whistles through dunes and history seems buried beneath sand, something unexpected brewed in the mid-11th century. This was not gold nor diplomacy. It was faith, resurrected and weaponized. At the heart of this awakening stood Yahya ibn Ibrahim, a chieftain of the Godala tribe. He had just returned from the rituals of Mecca and found his people spiritually adrift. Their Islam was superficial, their unity fractured across tribal lines. They shrank, not from enemies, but from the void within their own beliefs. Determined to restore what he perceived as lost devotion, Yahya sought out a spiritual mentor and found Abdallah ibn Yasin, a Maliki jurist from the Jazula clan, trained under Wagag ibn Zalu in southern Morocco's Sousse region. From 1046 onward, ibn Yasin preached an uncompromising Islam. Music and wine were forbidden, non-Islamic rites abolished, and a tithe of war booty allocated for religious scholars. Tribal loyalty was denounced. Only submission to Quran and Sharia mattered. Those who followed him and Yahya rebranded themselves Almoravidun, or Almoravids, named after the Raibat, fortified monastery, where their lessons and discipline were honed. That Raibat was not just a classroom, it was a crucible. Recruits trained under austere vows, hunger, prayer, study, and strict obedience. Militias formed around Quranic schools, not bloodlines. Within a few years, unity was not optional, it was doctrine. By 1051, the movement had cemented an alliance across Sanhaja chiefs, Lamtuna, Masyufa, Godala, for the first time since centuries past. In 1053, they launched their first military campaign, seizing Sijilmasa in the north and Audagost in the south by 1054 to 1055, key nodes on the Saharan gold-salt trade. Control of these caravan hubs meant wealth, trade tax, pilgrimage routes, even diplomatic power. Their military structure was unique. Less cavalry, more disciplined infantry phalanxes, tabla, backed by camel-mounted archers. They wore simple veils, earning them another name, Al-Mulathamun, the Veiled Ones, and marched in unison to the beat of war drums that struck fear into coastal Andalusians. But the desert is unforgiving in conflict as well as conviction. In 1056, Yahya ibn Umar al-Lamtuni, their military leader, led his forces toward the plateau fortress of Azugi, uniting with allied Takruri horsemen. Yet the Godala revolted. At the Battle of Tapfarilla, his force was ambushed. Yahya himself fell, his death marking a turning point. He is said to have called out in final prayer, "Hold fast to brotherhood in God." With Yahya gone, the mantle of leadership passed to his brother Abu Bakr ibn Umar, while Abdallah ibn Yasin retained spiritual authority. Under their joint stewardship, the Almoravids became both sword and creed. Abu Bakr next seized Akhmat and Efes, consolidating tribal unity through combat and devotion. Ibn Yasin followed doctrine with theological rigor until he too died in battle in 1059, fighting the heterodox Berber. Even after these losses, their resolve did not weaken, it sharpened, for the Sanhaja had become more than tribes. They were soldiers of God, sworn under Quran, no longer ruled by age-set hierarchy, but by holy law. Their loyalty was to the command of Sharia, and their capital was, so far, the echo of imams and camel hooves on dunes. Their next chapter lay beyond mere survival. They would build an empire. After the deaths of Yahya ibn Umar and Abdallah ibn Yasin, the Almoravids faced a crossroads. Would they collapse or rise? The answer came under Abu Bakr ibn Umar, who inherited military command, and Yusuf ibn Tashfin, who carried spiritual legitimacy. Abu Bakr led campaigns in the south, securing Aghmat and Fez by 1062, while Yusuf consolidated power in the north, eventually founding the political capital of Marrakesh. Marrakesh was more than a city. It was a symbol. Situated on the Tensift River with red ramparts and clean lines, it radiated Almoravid identity, a fortress city with minarets and mosques that stood for austere piety. Their military adapted. Infantry phalanxes trained by experienced sub-sheikhs moved as one on leather-carpeted dunes. Camel-mounted archers patrolled trade routes, drumbeats synchronized complex operations. Fortified camps, ribats, were built along caravan trails, each checkpoint enforcing Sharia and taxation. Between 1065 and 1070, the Almoravids marched on Tlemcen and Tunis, bringing the Maghreb under a single banner. Islam became standardized, Friday prayers unified, Maliki jurists settled law, and an Abbasid allegiance was announced, bestowing religious authority on the movement. Yusuf's leadership was tested in 1072, when Godala and Berguata rebellions flared, but he crushed them with speed. Chronicles praise him for combining tribal diplomacy with desert strategy, subduing enemies with minimal bloodshed. Yet the turning point came when the taifas of Al-Andalus cried for help in 1085. Christian forces, led by Alfonso VI, had conquered Toledo, the cultural and religious capital of Muslim Spain. Muslims were politically fractured, but their descendants were not beaten yet. Yusuf answered, crossing the Strait of Gibraltar in 1086 with 7,500 battle-hardened cavalry and camelry. These were desert warriors, unbound by fame. They belonged to desert strains and faith. On the 23rd of October, 1086, at Sagrajas, Al-Zalaka, near Badajoz, they annihilated Alfonso's Castilian force. Contemporary Muslim chroniclers say the ground was slick with blood, hence the Arabic name meaning slippery ground. Christian losses numbered in the thousands. This battle marked a turning point. Instead of losing Spain, Muslim taifas survived under Almoravid overlordship. The desert sword had changed history. Abu Bakr and Yusuf ruled from Marrakesh under a centralized administration. Provinces like Fez, Tlemcen, Cordoba, Seville, and Valencia reported annually. Inns, caravanserai, mosques, and schools flourished. Merchants carried gold dinars minted in Marrakesh to Timbuktu. Scholars wrote in Arabic and Berber tongues. Yet they remained ascetic. No royal palaces, calligraphic Quranic passages on bare stone walls. Friday sermons invoked piety and political obedience. Through uniform faith, they bound Maghreb and Andalusia with one creed. At its height, the Almoravid Empire spanned from Timbuktu's trade roads in the south to Cordoba's minarets in the north. But empires live on more than warfare. They survive on economics, administration, and culture. Trade was the empire's backbone. Caravans brought gold dust and salt from West African mines through Kumbisala and into Marrakesh. These goods funded armies, endowed mosques, and paid bureaucrats. In return, cloth, manuscripts, and horses traveled southward, forging cultural exchange across the desert. Minting coins was also symbolic. Almoravid dinars, struck in Marrakesh, bore Arabic inscriptions affirming Abbasid legitimacy and Maliki creed. These coins reached across the Mediterranean, to northern Africa, Andalusia, even as far as Cairo and Baghdad, a political statement that desert faith had transcended geography. Governance was equally influential. Provinces like Fez, Tlemcen, and Andalusian cities each had a governor, Wali, appointed by Marrakesh. Friday mosques reported midweek audits. Trade caravans paid religious tariffs. Scribes recorded local disputes in Arabic, then archived them. Governance was austere but structured. No grandeur, only function. Culture thrived in a model mixing Quran study, law, and oral tradition. Traditional Saharan oralists recited legends, but alongside them, scholars taught hadith, medicine, and astronomy in mosque schools. Scholars like Ibn Tumart and Andalusian jurists visited Marrakesh, reinforcing the intellectual bridge between North Africa and Spain. Military practice adapted too. Frontier towns built raibats, fortified outposts, along key desert crossings. These raibats served as early warning stations, vetting pilgrims and caravans, collecting zakat, and serving as cavalry training grounds. Soldiers practiced nighttime raids, built trenches with hides to muffle sound, and drilled daily in archery. In Andalusia, Almoravid control was both reform and paternalism. Taifa kings kept their titles but were supervised by wazirs from Marrakesh. Friday sermons in Cordoba and Granada invoked the Maliki imam's decrees. Customary Andalusian music and laxity were banned. Preaching was regulated, and judges were either Berber or Andalusian Muslims versed in Maliki jurisprudence. Yet, the empire never lost its desert soul. No ivory thrones, court robes were camel wool tunics. Royal proclamations were dictated outdoors. Rewards were basic: camel, sword, and cloak. These austerities kept corruption low and loyalty flexible. But cracks formed. Beyond the Sahara, humidity and heat made Marrakesh summers unbearable. Andalusian cities burned under civil strife between Taifa princes and Almoravid governors. Caravans crossing the desert faced depletion or disruption by climate and desert warlords. Still, they held together until a new voice rose in the mountains. By 1085, the balance of power in Al-Andalus had collapsed. The Christian kingdom of Castile captured Toledo, alarming Muslim Taifa rulers who scrambled for help. Their neighbors were weak, divided, and desperate. They called for reinforcements, but only one army answered: the desert-born Almoravids. Led by Yusuf ibn Tashfin, 7,500 seasoned cavalry and camel units crossed the Strait of Gibraltar in October 1086. The soldiers wore veils and leather armor and listened to Quranic chants from desert imams as they landed on Iberian shores, a stark contrast to European nights in colorful heraldry. On the 23rd of October, 1086, in the rolling plains of Alzalaka, Sagrajas, near Badajoz, the armies clashed. Christian chroniclers later described rivers of blood. Muslim sources called the field Alzalaka, slippery ground. The Almoravid cavalry struck in precise formations. Goat-herd path tactics disrupted Castilian ranks. Desert archers blocked flanks. Within hours, Alfonso VI's army was shattered. Thousands were killed or captured. Alfonso escaped only with great difficulty. This victory did more than halt Christian expansion. It redefined the political order. Rather than losing to Castile, the Muslim taifas entered into Almoravid overlordship. Cities from Seville to Valencia retained local rulers, but only under the authority of Marrakesh. Musa ibn Yusuf, Yusuf's son, acted as viceroy in Andalusia. Tax revenues and military quotas flowed south. For the next 2 decades, Almoravids expanded Andalusian control. Cordoba, Granada, and Toledo itself experienced changes. More mosques built, Maliki law strictly enforced, and Berber governors stationed to ensure discipline. Cultural syncretism grew. Andalusian architecture and desert austerity blended in new mosques and madrasas. Under desert discipline, Andalusian scholars studied at Almoravid centers like Al-Salamiyya in Marrakesh. Andalusians expatriated there became jurists and envoys. Trade resumed between Islamic Spain, North Africa, and West Africa. Caravans carrying gold, olive oil, wines, ironic under prohibition, and manuscripts. Yet internal tensions mounted. Andalusians resented Berber strictness. Christians in the north regrouped. Meanwhile, the Berber army was stretched across 2 continents. Maintaining frontier provinces relied on rapid deployment along silk-style routes and riverine ports. Ibn Yasin forever preached austerity, but not even desert fanatics could ride eternally. Still, conquest aside, Andalusian resistance was reshaped. Not defeated, but subdued, through a combination of desert martial strategy and disciplined religious rule. By the early 1100s, the Almoravid Empire stretched from Ghana's trade routes to Iberian minarets. But an empire built on austerity can crumble under excess, and internal dissent sowed the seeds of collapse. Enter Ibn Tumart, a scholarly figure born in the Masmuda Berber tribe of the High Atlas Mountains. Returning from pilgrimage in 1121, he was horrified by what he saw. Provinces welcoming luxury, Andalusian courts ignoring piety, and even Marrakesh's rulers blending into splendor. He declared himself the Mahdi, a divinely guided reformer, and vowed to restore pure Islam to the Maghreb. Ibn Tumart's fiery sermons attracted masses. He preached against Almoravid corruption, the misuse of wealth, departure from Quranic justice, and a dilution of Islamic discipline. His followers formed the Almohad movement, named after their core theologism, Al-Muwahhidun, the unityists of divine unity. He created a parallel leadership, recruiting warlords who adopted a militant approach to reform. Tensions exploded. In 1130, the Almohad forces laid siege to Marrakesh, forcing the Almoravids to fight at the Battle of Al-Buhaira, where the city's gates trembled under siege ramps and fires. Though the Almoravids held on, the city suffered profound damage. Eventually, Ibn Tumart died, but his successor, Abd al-Mumin, continued the campaign. By 1147, the Almohads marched into Marrakesh, routing the Almoravids from power. Marrakesh became their capital, its red ramparts still standing, but under whitewashed control. Abd al-Mumin declared a new Mahdi state, enforcing a stricter doctrine than even Almoravid Puritans. The watershed moment came in Iberia. The Almohads might have been more devout, but they lacked desert cavalry's cohesion. The Christian kingdoms banded together. In 1212, at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, Almohad forces suffered catastrophic defeat. From that point, Islamic Spain unraveled. Cities fell one after another: Minas, Seville, Valencia, until only Granada remained, under Nasrid rule, eventually fallen in 1492. But the desert's legacy endured. Almoravid architecture in Fez and Marrakesh, still towers, painted colors muted by centuries. Gold dinars minted in Marrakesh appear in West African grave sites, and Andalusian legal scholars still cite texts taught by their Almoravid masters. Maliki jurisprudence remains prevalent in North and West Africa to this day. Beyond the monuments, the story sends a message. The Sahara roared not through armies alone, but through faith, discipline, and unity across tribes. It shows that ordinary desert dwellers, not kings or merchants, shaped empires that spanned continents and altered the course of global history.